This is probably the last set of videos I'm going to be recording for this semester, Fall 21. This is a review of test number 3. I apologize for it coming so late because we are just days away from our final exam time, but I had a few students still taking makeups. Didn't want to produce a video until after that was done. So I'm just going to review the slide identifications first. I'm just going to go through each of the parts. So for each of the slide identifications, you'll be able to see the main information, and I'll cover just a little bit of what other things you could say about the works. So for example, for School of Athens, we could mention that it's fresco painting. We could mention that it uses one-point perspective, that it is a kind of a representation of the history of two parts of the kind of like the history of philosophy, that Aristotle and Plato, and that one side of the painting is all the set of philosophers going into the medieval period who were influenced from Plato, and vice versa on the other side, all the philosophers who were influenced by Aristotle. Okay, so what could you say about Judith and her maidservant? Number one, it's a Baroque painting. It's an example of tenebrism, in that it has this extreme chiaroscuro type effect. It's very dark and with a very kind of extreme, strong, direct lighting. You can talk about how we discussed the issue of the cast shadow from the candle and how it's actually slightly inaccurate based on the physics, but that it works pictorially. And you could also talk about the story, that in this very moment, Judith has just chopped off the head of Holofernes, and she and her maidservant are trying to hide the head. I can't actually remember why I think they needed the head for some reason, but I can't remember why. And you could, if you remember a lot about the biography of Gentileschi, you can talk about her life and how this particular theme was an important part of her career. She did it multiple times. Okay, for this piece, the most important thing to remember is that it's a print. It is an etching. We talked a good deal about how Rembrandt, as one of the greatest printmakers, as well as one of the great painters, but one of the greatest printmakers of all time, how what he's doing here is kind of he's playing with how he's inking the plate to kind of heighten the illusion of value in space. So he's kind of like over wiping some areas or highly wiping some areas and then under wiping other areas to allow a lot of residual ink, and that creates this really kind of dramatic lighting. And so with this painting by Lebrun, let's see, one of the things, I'd say the main thing that we talked about in this painting is it as a form of ambient color, where you could see kind of the reflected color from various things, especially the reflected color from the cat in the painting. And we also talked about how this self-portrait, the purpose of it was primarily for her to use as kind of like a calling card or an advertisement. It's a painting that proves her skill as a painter to help her gain commissions. I apologize for all the extraneous sound. It's kind of a busy time in the house right now. And Liberty Leading People, let's see, French Romanticism. We talked about Delacroix as being kind of like one side of the kind of like debate as to what Romantic painting looked like in France, with Ingres on one side, where he is emphasizing a much more kind of linear-based, contour line-based, and very controlled way of painting, and Delacroix is a much more loose, gestural painter, much more painterly. We also talked about the triangular composition and how the whole thing is organized in this big kind of triangle that has a lot of energy and a lot of movement. Yeah. The main thing about this piece from Daumier, first of all, is that it's an example of printmaking. It's an example of lithography. These lithographs that Daumier was doing, these were for newspaper publication. So he's essentially doing the kind of work that today a newspaper photographer would do, which is that he's creating images that are documenting sort of everyday life. In this particular case, it's a documentation, sort of like a crime scene documentation. Um, and so, anything else? That's about the main thing. And that takes us to the first part. So in the second part, I'll get to slides 6 through 10. All right. Thank you very much. Actually, I can't remember how to end.